Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
Good day and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, November the 13th. On this episode of the Word, cool connections. Hey, how about those late planted yields? Why doesn't that work? And then agronomy answers, as many as I can get to. And yes, Paul, I will this week talk about pH. I know, 2 weeks ago I promised about it. Last week I didn't even mention it. Fair enough, good comments. We will talk about it this week, along with many other things in the agronomy answers. Let's go! Yes, our own Dr. Dave Hooker, University of Guelph, Ridgetown campus, currently this week as we speak at the American Society of Agronomy meetings talking about the value of wheat. Most Ontario growers know the value of wheat in the rotation. We do have an agronomy question about that as well, but I can't think of anybody better to spread that message than Dr. Dave. So thanks for representing Ontario, Dave, and thanks for everything you do for Ontario agriculture and indeed agriculture across North America. Yes, and moving on cool connections. Paul, Paul says, Peter, like awesome. The Ontario Ag Conference, the Southwest Ag Conference, Midwestern Ag Conference, they're all great. But we look at the program. And why, Peter, why is Production Pundits only one day? It used to be at the end of both days. We love that session. Like, my boys love that session. Why can't it be at the end of both days again? Oh, Paul, really? Really? You want Wheat Pete to have to put up with Patrick Lynch 2 days in a row? That would be cruel and unusual punishment. Bring your questions. The last day of Southwest Ag Conference. We don't have to stop at the end of the session. You can come up after. We can banter for quite a bit longer. But yes, appreciate the support. But and get registered. By golly, get registered. Come out and see Lynch and Johnson go at it yet again. On the cool connections, continuing on that vein, man, I just love how things kind of come together. It's so neat. So thanks to being on Real Agriculture, thanks to being on different videos that we put up on our wheat schools. Antti, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but Antti from Finland actually reached out about winter wheat seeding dates and seeding rates. They haven't done any work that he could find in Finland since 1975. They grow almost all oats there as opposed to wheat. And he says one of the reasons is because we always end up planting wheat into wet conditions too late in the fall. He wants to do some work there. So that is really cool coming out of the work that we've talked about here on the Word and across Canada and into the U.S. as well. Diego on biologicals is reaching out quite often from Argentina. That's neat. And Eric Watson, so we just put up a new YouTube video, a new Wheat School video with Joanna Fallings and myself talking about the latest yen information. Eric Watson, you may recall, is the former record wheat yield holder from New Zealand. He's been replaced by Tim Lamyman from the UK, but Eric has won it twice, I think, or maybe even 3 times that he has set that world record. Quite impressive. He watches the video and he fires to me that, hey, thanks for that. That's given me some new ideas for how I might achieve record wheat yields even higher than Tim Lamyman. I just love how that all comes together. And in terms of just getting good information out there, Rashad from Ethiopia reaching out about imagery and indices. And this is a really interesting thought process because Ethiopia, mainly subsistence farmers, And his thought process was, can we use imagery and look at some of the indices, like the NDVI, non-differentiated vegetation index, or some indice to help those farmers do better? And he was basically told, oh yes, these indices can give you information on how what the grower should do. More nitrogen, better weed control, soil pH. I included John Sulik in the conversation. John is the precision agriculture researcher at the University of Guelph, and John just sent back to Rashad, the indice by itself means nothing because it's just a relative measurement. Non-different NDVI. At the end of the day, you can get nice green areas that you think are great growth and red areas that you think are poor growth. But if that is true, why is that better growth and poorer growth? Or is the green area actually weed pressure and not crop? Like, the indices really are great at giving us an idea of where to go and look in the field and compare one to the other, but you need the agronomy to go in there to try to help those people. The indices by themselves have virtually no value until you interpret them. So some of this it's always that the technology is ahead of the agronomy and we're always trying to catch up, but just being able to help people across the globe, whether it's on wheat seeding dates, it's on precision agriculture, it's just biologicals, anything. It's the cool connections that we make are really, really outstanding. Okay, I want to move on. And just on the late plant yields, Alan reaching out to me saying, hey, we had some edible beans. We thought they were an absolute write-off. They got pounded and pounded and pounded. You know, it was just such an interesting year. They came back. The ones that were there bushed out. We ended up with 22 bag white beans in a situation where we thought for sure we were going to be less than 10 bags. Don't ever give up. Bob from DeKalb saying, Peter, here's a really interesting plot result. 101-day corn planted May the 20th, harvested at 260 bushels per acre, 19% moisture. Got rained out of the field, too wet. From May the 20th until June the 16th. Okay, June the 16th, not 101-day corn. Come back in with a 93-day corn. June the 16th, 93-day corn, 170 bushels per acre at 23% moisture. That's a 90 bushel yield hit between May 20th and June 16th. So it's like huge impacts, but you got rained out of the field, wasn't fit again. Not that the grower did anything wrong, and June 16th corn, 170 bushel, is actually pretty darn good. Bobby, in fact, so a different person, Bobby reaching out as well, saying planted on June the 16th on some heavy clay soil, 170 bushels per acre at 25% moisture. Bobby also saying there was a strip in the field where they did not apply fungicide. So we've often wondered, you know, with late planted corn, do you apply that fungicide? Because you are going to delay maturity. But when you get tar spot, it just makes such a big difference. Remember though, tar spot on late planted corn was not nearly as severe as tar spot on early planted corn because we got super dry through September and this tar spot effectively stopped. Still, Bobby's corn, no fungicide, lost 30 bushels per acre. So absolutely made a difference. Dean sending me an awesome email. Dean's been working hard at improving his farming practices. He's got tile drainage in. He's learned to slow down and not ram it into less than ideal conditions. I think he planted his corn May 20th or 19th, something like that. And all he could say was, you know, Peter, between patience and drainage, in 2024, I had record crops across the board, 225 bushel per acre corn. Never done that before. Dean, you really remind me, or perhaps you took lessons from my great friend, Rob Templeman. He is the best farmer I know of from a have patience, use drainage. You just don't get rammy. You can do an awesome job. So great for you, Dean, from that perspective. Mike tweeting out his October the 26th wheat has now emerged, so that's really cool. At the same time, Mark tweeting out that his September the 4th wheat that he broadcast into his standing soybeans, he combined those soybeans on November the 8th. The wheat was 10 inches tall. That was his estimation. He said it just looked like silage coming out of the back of the combine, but the wheat looks gorgeous. I doubt clipping it's going to hurt it at all. The beans are in the bin. Mark, I'm still not a broadcast wheat guy because of the seed treatment issue. We've talked lots about that, but yes, way to go, and I'm glad you have a great wheat crop. In fact, Mark said that wheat crop may well be the field that he puts into the yen competition. Okay, so now I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk about why doesn't that work? So Neil reached out to me and he said, hey, Peter, do you have a chart? Because if I go to the Canadian Grain Commission, the chart there on corn goes up to 370 grams per half liter to give me a bushel weight. But this year, if you can imagine, we have corn that is over 370 grams per half liter, and I'd like to know the bushel weight. And I thought to myself, well, that's simple. Just use the wheat or the soybean chart, because they'll go over 370 grams per half liter. But I went and looked and compared them, and that actually doesn't work. 370 gram per half liter soybeans are 58 pounds per bushel. 370 gram per half liter wheat is 61 pounds per bushel. And 370 gram per half liter corn is 59 pounds per bushel, give or within a point or two. And I just go like, huh? That's just simple math. Come on, that can't be. Grams per half liter is the measurement. It's just math after that. So I got digging a little bit deeper, and guess what? Our test weight conversions from that grams to half liter actually correct for settling in the grain sample, and wheat settles separately or differently than soybean settles differently than corn, so we get different numbers. And you actually, to get the right numbers, you have to use a chondrometer. The official one is a Shopper chondrometer, and there is a calculation for that, and it is on the Canadian Grain Commission website. There's a little calculator there that you can use. We will link it in the post. But yep, test weight conversions aren't that simple, because we do consider that settling in the sample, and that makes the difference. So that is why it doesn't work the way that Johnson thought it did. Nick saying, okay, Peter, corn after wheat versus corn after soybeans. What should be the yield difference? Because I had a split field, and Dr. Dave's presenting on this. You talk about it lots. I should get more corn following wheat than I do with corn following soybeans. But in my situation, I got 7 bushels more corn following the soybeans than I did following the wheat. And so what is going on? So Nick, I actually have to ask a whole lot more questions, which I don't have the answer to yet. But did you plant a cover crop after the wheat? Because if you planted an oat cover crop, didn't apply nitrogen, let it get big, you can actually starve the next corn crop for nitrogen. And we saw that fairly significantly in 2024, that early nitrogen tie-up had a significant impact on the crop. So that's one thing. Did you leave the straw residue on? What tillage did you do? There's many questions from that standpoint. And all this drives home, to me, is how complex all of this stuff is. The research is solid. We know that long-term those numbers work, but short-term you can still have results that just make you scratch your head. And while we're on that, some questions coming in around phosphorus in manure. So, phosphorus in manure, remember that compared to commercial fertilizer, in Ontario, we assume that about 50% of the phosphorus in manure is available the next year, and the balance becomes available down the road. It's not that phosphorus doesn't count, it does count, but just not the year after application. Not every jurisdiction is at 50%. Minnesota, for example, is at 80%. But if you get back a manure test, and I hope you're all testing your manure, because if you don't test it, you don't know what you have. But in some cases, the manure phosphorus comes back as percent P. Remember that in North America, we talk about fertilizer phosphorus as P2O5. That's the chemical composition. And that means that if you actually look at percent P, it isn't a one-to-one with P2O5, because clearly there's more to P2O5 than there is to P. So if you get just a phosphorus number, a percent phosphorus, you have to multiply, the conversion factor is multiply times 2.29 to get to fertilizer phosphorus. And by the way, in other parts of the world, like New Zealand and Australia, they think we are nuts for talking about P2O5. In fertilizer, they only talk about percent P. Whichever way you do it, you just have to make sure that you compare apples to apples. All right, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk, yes, Paul, about pH. So Davis from Alberta sent in a really great question, and he asked for help with his soil samples. He had some low pH, down as low as 5.2, but he said that his crops were still doing very well. He was looking at some nitrogen management, some tillage management, some different things, but his question really was, like, at 5.2, how is it that I'm still doing so well with yields? Because doesn't low pH have a negative impact? Should I be liming my soil? And by the way, Davis's organic matters were incredibly high, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10%. And therein lies the crux of the issue. So when you have high organic matter soils, you often do have lower pHs, but those lower pHs are all right because the high organic matter levels help mitigate for those low pH levels. The other thing that you need to think about whenever you're talking about pH is the buffer pH, and we will link just an excellent article by Dan Kaiser out of Minnesota in the Post here, talking about the impact. They're looking again at liming recommendations in Minnesota, but the impact of buffer pH. So when you get your soil test back, if your soil pH is below 6 or below 5.8, you should also get a buffer pH. And what the buffer pH tells you is how easy it is going to be to raise the pH on that soil. In Davis's situation, he had a buffer pH on one field of 6.1. The pH was 5.4, buffer of 6.1. That's going to be a tough field to get that soil pH up into that 6.0 range. It's just going to be tough. On another field, a pH of 5.2, lower soil pH, but a buffer pH of 7. And that's going to be way easier to bring that soil pH up over 6 and into a more productive zone. So you just kind of step back and you've got to understand pH and you've got to test for pH. And here's the other example. Chris called me out of North Dakota. Well, actually, Jordan called me and linked Chris in. Chris farms in North Dakota, and he says, everybody tells me I have so much phosphorus in the soil, and yet I continue to have to apply fertilizer. Like, what can I do to actually release the phosphorus in the soil? I hear that gypsum loosens soil up. Can I put gypsum with my starter fertilizer, with my MAP in the band, to loosen that soil up and make the phosphorus more available? Well, first off, the answer is no to the gypsum, because gypsum only helps with soil tilth, with soil structure, in the rare occasion where magnesium is an issue. We won't get into that. It gets a little technical, but do not put gypsum with your MAP fertilizer, because gypsum is calcium sulfate. The calcium will tie up the phosphate and make it unavailable for your crop plant. So stop there. Don't do that. In terms, though, of trying to unlock that phosphorus and make it more available to the plant, anything you can do to get better root growth is going to help the plant access the phosphorus in the soil. And one of the things, as we talked with Chris, was that the pH in the top 2 inches of his soil, and good for him, he had done soil samples from 0 to 2, and then from 2 to 6 inch, and from 6 to 12 inch, I believe. And the 0 to 2 soil sample was a pH of 5. At a pH of 5, you are restricting root growth. You are limiting the availability of that phosphorus because you are restricting root growth. So liming in that situation will really help increase the root growth, and that should help the plant access more phosphorus. I mean, there's lots more that goes on there, but you really do have to think from that perspective how that all comes together. Okay, I want to finish up here quickly. Clark saying, oh, Pete, we got manganese deficiency out the yin-yang in our wheat crop. Should we correct it? Well, first off, Clark, make sure it's manganese deficiency. And as my good friend Ryan said, we're surprised we didn't see more manganese deficiency this fall, given how dry it is. But my experience on sand soils in the Strathroy area is if you have severe manganese deficiency in the fall and you don't correct it, you will have dead wheat in the spring. So get that job done. But do a soil test, a tissue test to make sure it's manganese, because Chris Rowlands from Honeyland Labs sent us some tissue samples that he had seen come into his lab, and boy, that wheat was nitrogen and sulfur deficient like crazy. And then everybody listening is going to say, but Pete, you said don't put nitrogen on the wheat crop in the fall. And the answer is don't put nitrogen on the wheat crop in the fall, even though the tissue tests rather are looking deficient. And some excellent work from Tom Kilser out of New York on triticale. And his results clearly show that on triticale, planted much before wheat, if you apply nitrogen late in the going because that triticale looks tough, it has zero benefit. If you're going to get any benefit, and this is forage triticale, not grain triticale, so with grain triticale, I'm not even sure you could get benefit in the fall, but on forage triticale, the nitrogen and the sulfur must be applied to early planted triticale at planting. If you don't plant the triticale early, nitrogen doesn't help at all because the crop simply doesn't have a chance to utilize it in the fall, and you lose it over the winter. And that is a long dissertation yet again, but I'm out of time. That's it. That's all on behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture. This is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, November the 13th. Hey, keep the comments coming. Keep the plot results coming. Just keep the feedback coming, and I will keep talking way too long yet again next week. See you then.